name's Matthew Biberman. I'm a professor of English at the University of Louisville and a writer. Big Sid was my dad, and he acquired a reputation for working on all kinds of motorcycles, but especially Vincent motorcycles, which are British motorcycles from the sort of golden age that often have a legendary reputation among motorcyclists as the first superbike, the first bike to achieve performance levels that surpassed cars and anything except planes. They were the fastest machines that did not leave the earth. And Sid acquired a reputation as being somebody who could get the most out of what was then the most powerful motorcycle on the planet. And for that reason, his reputation went around the world. People called my dad Big Sid because he was 6'5", and as a young man, a very strong, big, powerful guy. And when they were doing the translation of the book into Spanish, the translator called me up and he wanted to know how to translate the word big. And he said, big like Santa Claus? And I said, no, big like Paul Bunyan, big like giant. What he immediately attracted him to riding a motorcycle by the age of 13 or 14 was that it felt like he was free of his body when he was riding, particularly going around curves like a ballerina, you know, and that's what he loved. And that appeal got passed on to me. And the first motorcycle I had, I was about 10 years old. Back then, when you're that age, you know, you're fearless. Death means nothing to you. So you ride and you fall in love with that feeling of being kind of out of your body. The story behind the Vincati is that my father moved from Norfolk, Virginia, where I was born and raised, to Louisville, to here, and had an apartment not too far from where I was living. And I wasn't quite sure why he had made this decision to uproot himself and come. But then later I realized that it was because he had a sense that he was about to die. And within 9 months or so of renting a small apartment, he had a massive heart attack, and he would have died, except that I popped into his apartment unannounced and found him clutching a pillow like this, just simply waiting to die. And I got him into the car and drove him to the hospital, and he had a 4-way bypass. And when he woke up, the first thing he said to me was, "Why didn't they just let me die?" And the doctors out in the hallway said to me, if he doesn't find a reason to live, he's not going to live. And in those days, we still got a lot of pictures in the mail. This was around 2000. And a big packet of pictures from a big motorcycle rally at the Isle of Man in England had arrived. And I just brought in this stack of pictures to look at. And one of the pictures was a picture of a Vincati, and I had never seen a Vincati before, and he explained to me that it was the chassis of a Ducati, an Italian motorcycle, with its motor removed and a Vincent motor, a British motor, put in its place. I really liked the idea because the two bikes that we grew up riding when he was a young man and I was just learning to ride, he would ride his Vincent and he would let me ride his Ducati. And I said to him, well, if you walk out of here, we'll build one ourselves. And he looked at me and he said, you must be crazy. And then I went home and I started to call around to friends, and I found a guy who was willing to sell me an entire Ducati without the motor in it, a complete rolling chassis. And I bought it and came back to the hospital, told my father that I had already started the project and that we had the donor chassis on its way. And at that point he knew I was serious, and the quest to build the Vincati had begun. It was a moment where Sid and I were working in the garage, and we really came to a clear understanding of who he was as a man and who I was as a man. I said to him, you may be a good mechanic, but you're a lousy teacher. And he said, but I've been teaching guys how to fix motorcycles, forever. And I said, yeah, but not some guy like me who doesn't know how to hold a wrench. And he said, well, you may be a good teacher, but you're a lousy mechanic. And it was the kind of thing that earlier would have really cut me, and I may have stormed out and decided never to talk to him again. But I looked at him and I said, you're right, and don't I know it? And we understood each other at that point, that we were these flawed creatures, and we were both broken but complementary, and that we were able to work together as a very good team. The idea that there was a story here that would serve as a book just didn't even cross my mind. What happened was that once we started to share the story, once we got the bike running and were riding it and enjoying it, Peter Egan, who was a well-known moto journalist, came down and visited us and did a big splashy center page article for Cycle World, then the biggest motorcycle magazine in America. And I read his story and I said, wow, there is a story here. If Peter Egan thinks there's a story here, there's a story here, and I like what he did. I think I can do it better. And that's when I really started on the journey of trying to tell my version of what happened. In 2009, when the book came out, I was able to do a book tour. And one time I remember a kid that was like 10 years old, it was like me back when I started, and he came up and he had the book. And he was like, sign my book. And I said to him, wow, you like the book? And he's like, oh, I read it, and then I read it over again, I read it over again, and we go and I motocross, and I just read your book again and again in a tent. The book has readers who read it because they're in prison or they're in a rehab program, and the book has become really important to them in their own healing process of figuring out why they are the man that they are, how their life sort of went off the rails, what went wrong between their relationship with their father, what they want to do to set their life right. I didn't see myself as writing a kind of a self-help book, but there are readers who continue to pass it on to other readers because they're in these groups that are about turning your life around. It's really serendipitous that the book came out in Spanish, and it is another dream come true for me as a writer to actually hold a book that is my book in a language I can't really read. Mariana, the publisher, she got a good translator and has really made what's a very beautiful book. And it's really a dream come true to me because her approach to making my book is much more in line with my own vision of what I would love my book to be. I got to restore 3 chapters from my manuscript that in English were cut from the book, and I also thoroughly revised the English manuscript before the Spanish translator set to work on it. So it is in some sense a different book. It's kind of the director's cut. I chose to change the title because when the book came out in 2009, Sid was still alive. And once Sid died in 2013, I felt like I could call it what I always really wanted to call it, which was the legend of Big Sid and the Vincati, because he's dead now, and so it's sort of properly a legend now. And I didn't feel comfortable doing that while he was alive. The book now is a different experience for me to read 10 years after it came out, because the ending of the story is different because life has moved on. The whole payoff of the book is for Sid to accept that sometimes in life dreams don't come true, and that's for everyone, and that's okay. So Sid accepted that his dream of going to the Bonneville Salt Flats and setting a land speed record there, which had fueled his whole life, was never going to happen. But that was okay. The book came out, he was still alive, and local motorcyclists here in Louisville really embraced Sid as a local guru motorcycle legend of Louisville, and said to him, "We don't like how this book ended. You're going to the Salt Flats, my friend. You're setting a record. We are going to get behind you, and we are going to make this happen." We then amazingly built 2 more motorcycles after we built the Vincati, took them to Bonneville, and set a record. To show up at the Salt Flats having never run there before and produce a record on a machine that I'd only ridden around the block. I mean, that's stunning. I couldn't really believe that, but it happened, and we came back and we had that record for 2 years. So Sid got that at the end, and it was a sweetness in life at the end that Sid didn't even anticipate, and took it with a tremendous amount of grace.